The sound of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Copper Creek, causing Hazel Montgomery to drop to the ground, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. It was 1876, and the West was still untamed, dangerous, and utterly indifferent to the suffering of a 24-year-old woman who had already endured more tragedy than most faced in a lifetime. "You all right, miss?" A deep voice called out from behind her. Hazel turned to see a tall man approaching, his boots kicking up dust with each purposeful stride. His face was partially hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat, but she could make out a strong jawline covered with stubble and eyes that seemed to hold both concern and caution. "It was just some drunken fool shooting at a tin can," he explained, extending a hand to help her up. Hazel ignored his outstretched hand and stood on her own, brushing the dirt from her simple gray dress. "Thank you for your concern, but I can manage." The man nodded, respecting her independence. "Name's Wyatt Caldwell. New in town." "Passing through," she replied curtly, already turning to continue on her way. She had no interest in conversation, especially with a stranger. Copper Creek was merely a stop on her journey to where she wasn't entirely sure yet. "Folks around here are usually a bit more neighborly," Wyatt commented, falling into step beside her despite her obvious desire to be left alone. Hazel stopped and faced him directly. "Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate your assistance, but I have no interest in being neighborly. Not anymore." "You look like you could use a friend," he observed, his eyes studying her face with unexpected gentleness. "I can't smile anymore," she said flatly, the words escaping before she could contain them. "So friendship would be rather one-sided, wouldn't you agree?" Instead of being put off by her bluntness, a slow, easy grin spread across Wyatt's face. "Then I'll make you laugh," he replied with such confidence that for a moment, Hazel almost believed him. "Almost. Many have tried," she said quietly. "All have failed." She walked away then, leaving him standing in the middle of the dusty street. What she didn't see was the look of determination that settled on Wyatt Caldwell's face as he watched her go. The boarding house was clean but sparse, exactly what Hazel needed. Mrs. Fitzgerald, the proprietress, was a widow who didn't ask many questions beyond whether Hazel had enough money for a week's lodging. "Dinner's at 6, the older woman informed her. "You're welcome to join the other boarders in the dining room, or I can have a tray sent up if you prefer." "A tray, please," Hazel replied. The thought of making small talk with strangers held no appeal. Her room was small but adequate, a narrow bed with a quilt, a wooden chair by the window, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small dresser. Hazel unpacked her meager belongings. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a framed photograph of a smiling family mother, father, and a younger version of herself, one whose eyes hadn't yet witnessed the cruelties of the world. She placed the photograph face down in the drawer. Some memories were too painful to face. A knock at her door startled her. Opening it, she found Mrs. Fitzgerald holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "These came for you," the woman said with a curious expression. "From a Mr. Caldwell." Hazel took the flowers reluctantly. A small note was tucked among the colorful blooms. "Laughter may be harder to find than gold in these parts, but I'm a stubborn prospector. Wyatt." She placed the flowers on the windowsill, unsure whether to be annoyed or touched by the gesture. No matter, she would be moving on soon enough. Morning came with brilliant sunshine streaming through the thin curtains. Hazel dressed quickly, her stomach reminding her that she had eaten little the previous day. Perhaps she would venture to the general store for supplies before continuing her journey westward. The main street of Copper Creek was already bustling with activity, merchants opening their shops, ranchers bringing goods to trade, and children running to the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. Hazel kept her head down as she walked, avoiding eye contact that might invite conversation. "Good morning, Miss Montgomery." Hazel froze at the sound of Wyatt Caldwell's voice. How had he learned her name? She turned slowly to find him leaning against the hitching post outside the general store, looking far too pleased with himself. Mrs. Fitzgerald is quite informative when properly approached, he explained, answering her unspoken question. Especially when someone expresses concern for a new arrival who seems to be carrying a heavy burden. My burdens are my own, Mr. Caldwell, Hazel replied coldly, and not a subject for town gossip. Wyatt straightened, his expression turning serious. No gossip, I assure you. Just concern. Your concern is misplaced. She moved to walk past him, but he stepped into her path. Let me buy you breakfast, he said. The cafe across the street makes biscuits that might not make you smile, but they'll certainly satisfy your hunger. Hazel was about to refuse when her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. Wyatt's eyes crinkled with amusement. Just breakfast, she conceded reluctantly. And then I would appreciate being left to my own devices. As the lady wishes, he agreed, though something in his tone suggested he had no intention of honoring that request. The cafe was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the scent of fresh coffee permeating the air. They sat at a table by the window, and Hazel noticed how several patrons nodded respectfully toward Wyatt. You seem well known here, she observed as a waitress promptly brought coffee without being asked. I've been in Copper Creek for about 5 years now, he replied. Run the livery stable at the edge of town, and do some ranching on the side. A businessman, then. A man trying to build something lasting, he corrected. This country's changing fast. Those who don't adapt get left behind. The waitress returned with plates of biscuits, eggs, and bacon. Hazel hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was before her. What brings you to Copper Creek? Wyatt asked after they had eaten in silence for a few minutes. Hazel carefully placed her fork down. I told you yesterday. I'm passing through. To where? I haven't decided yet. Wyatt studied her for a moment. Running from something or toward something? The question struck too close to the truth. Neither, she lied. Simply traveling. Alone? That's dangerous for anyone in these parts, especially a woman. I've faced worse dangers than the open road, Mr. Caldwell. Something in her tone must have conveyed the seriousness of her statement because Wyatt didn't press further. Instead, he changed the subject. There's a social at the church this Saturday, he said casually. Good food, some music. Might be a pleasant diversion if you're still in town. I don't expect to be, Hazel replied, though in truth, she had no clear plans. Her funds were limited, and she needed to find work soon if she was to continue her journey. Well, if you change your mind. He let the invitation hang in the air between them. After breakfast, Wyatt insisted on walking her back to the boarding house. As they approached, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A group of men were gathered outside the saloon, voices raised in anger. Stay here, Wyatt instructed, his expression suddenly serious. He strode toward the disturbance with purpose. Hazel, of course, did not stay put. She followed at a distance, curious despite herself. The scene became clear as she approached. A young man, barely out of his teens, was being confronted by 3 rough-looking cowboys. The boy's face was already bloody from what appeared to be a solid punch. You cheated us, boy, one of the cowboys snarled, grabbing the young man by his shirt collar. I swear I didn't, the youth protested, fear evident in his voice. Wyatt stepped between them. That's enough, Barton, he said firmly to the lead cowboy. Whatever your grievance, this isn't the way to settle it. Stay out of this, Caldwell, Barton growled. The kid took $20 off us with marked cards. Did you see these marked cards? Wyatt asked calmly. Don't need to. No wet behind the ears kid beats Barton Delaney at poker without cheating. Wyatt sighed as if dealing with a petulant child. Let him go, and we'll sort this out properly. Already sorted, Barton replied, drawing his pistol and pointing it at the terrified young man. What happened next occurred so quickly that Hazel barely registered the sequence of events. Wyatt's hand moved in a blur, drawing his own weapon and knocking Barton's gun aside in one fluid motion. The shot went wild, shattering a saloon window. "Now you owe Jenkins for a window too," Wyatt said, his voice deceptively casual even as he kept his pistol trained on Barton. "I suggest you boys cool off at the sheriff's office. I'll escort you there myself." Barton's face contorted with rage, but he wasn't foolish enough to challenge Wyatt further. Something in the steady gaze of the livery owner suggested this wasn't the first time he'd faced down an angry gun. "This ain't over," Barton muttered as he and his companions were marched toward the sheriff's office. Hazel approached the young man who was dabbing at his bloody nose with a handkerchief. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes, madam," he replied shakily. "Mr. Caldwell has a way of showing up when trouble starts." "Does that happen often?" The young man smiled weakly. "Often enough. He used to ride with the Rangers, you know, before settling here." This new information about Wyatt Caldwell intrigued Hazel despite her determination to remain detached. A former Texas Ranger, now running a livery stable in a small town, there was surely a story there. She returned to the boarding house, her mind unexpectedly full of questions about the man who had declared his intention to make her laugh. His intervention in the street brawl had revealed a different side to him, decisive, competent in the face of danger, respected by the townspeople. None of that changed her plans, she reminded herself firmly. Copper Creek was merely a temporary stop. Attachment to anyone or anything would only lead to more pain when it was inevitably lost. Later that afternoon, as Hazel was contemplating her dwindling funds and the necessity of finding temporary work, another knock came at her door. This time, it was a young boy of about 10, with a gap-toothed grin and freckles scattered across his nose. "Miss Montgomery?" he asked. "Mr. Caldwell says to give you this." He handed her a folded piece of paper before darting away down the hallway. Hazel unfolded the note with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. "Miss Montgomery, if you're in need of employment, Mrs. Hollister at the dressmaker shop is looking for someone with sewing skills. If that suits your abilities, mention my name. If not, I know of other opportunities." Wyatt, Hazel's first instinct was to crumple the note. How presumptuous of him to assume she needed his help finding work. But practicality won out over pride. Her funds wouldn't last more than another week, and sewing was indeed among her skills. The following morning, she made her way to Hollister's dress shop, a neat establishment with a display window featuring a fashionable gown of burgundy silk. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. Mrs. Hollister was a plump, pleasant-faced woman in her 50s, with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and pins stuck in the cushions strapped to her wrist. "May I help you, dear?" she asked, looking up from the fabric she was cutting.
"I'm Hazel Montgomery."
"Mr. Caldwell mentioned you might be looking for someone with sewing skills." Mrs. Hollister's face brightened. "Oh, yes. Wyatt mentioned a new arrival might stop by. Do you have experience with dressmaking?" "I was a seamstress in Chicago for 3 years," Hazel replied. It wasn't a complete lie. She had indeed worked as a seamstress, though it seemed a lifetime ago now. "Wonderful," Mrs. Hollister exclaimed. "I've more orders than I can handle since Mrs. Peterson announced her daughter's engagement. The wedding is to be quite the affair." After a brief demonstration of her stitching technique, Hazel was hired to work 6 days a week for a reasonable wage plus room and board if she wanted to move from the boarding house. "I'll keep my current lodgings for now," Hazel decided, not wanting to commit to anything that suggested permanence. As she was leaving the shop with the agreement to start the following day, she nearly collided with Wyatt, who was just entering. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her with a tip of his hat. "I see you found your way to Mrs. Hollister's." "Yes, thank you for the suggestion," she replied formally. "Did she hire you?" "She did." A genuine smile spread across his face. "That's good news. Eleanor Hollister is one of the finest women in town. You'll be treated fairly working for her." "I appreciate the recommendation, Mr. Caldwell," Hazel said, making to move past him. "You know," he said, causing her to pause, "I still haven't given up on my promise." "Your promise?" "To make you laugh," he reminded her. "I'm a patient man, Miss Montgomery. And determined." For a moment, Hazel almost felt the ghost of a smile tugging at her lips, not from amusement, but from the sheer audacity of his persistent optimism. "A futile determination, I'm afraid," she replied softly. "Good day, Mr. Caldwell." As she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back, and for the first time in months, she wondered if the wall she had built around her heart had a weakness she hadn't accounted for. The next few days fell into a pattern. Hazel would arrive at the dress shop early, work diligently on the wedding gown and associated garments for the bridal party, and return to her room at the boarding house by early evening. Mrs. Hollister was a kind employer who didn't pry into Hazel's past but provided pleasant conversation when Hazel seemed receptive and comfortable silence when she didn't. True to his word, Wyatt Caldwell continued his campaign to bring a smile to Hazel's face. Each day brought a new attempted bouquet of wildflowers with a note containing a terrible joke, a small carved wooden horse left at the dress shop with a message saying it was the finest steed in my stable, though admittedly the least useful, and once, a plate of cookies delivered by the same gap-toothed boy with a note claiming they were baked by my own hands, though I wouldn't recommend eating them unless you're partial to the taste of saddle soap. Hazel told herself the gestures were annoying, but she found herself looking forward to each new attempt, curious what he would try next. On Friday afternoon, as Hazel was putting the finishing touches on a bridesmaid's dress, the shop door opened to admit a well-dressed woman of about 30, accompanied by a girl of perhaps 16. "Mrs. Hollister," the woman called out imperiously, "I must speak with you about Helena's dress for the Peterson wedding." Mrs. Hollister emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Farnsworth, what seems to be the concern?" "Helena has heard that Abigail Peterson's gown is to have French lace on the bodice. We simply cannot have Helena appearing in anything less sophisticated for such an important occasion." The girl, presumably Helena, looked mortified by her mother's behavior. "Mrs. Farnsworth, the design we agreed upon," Mrs. Hollister began, "is no longer acceptable," Mrs. Farnsworth interrupted. "I insist on modifications." Hazel continued her stitching, trying to remain unnoticed, but Mrs. Farnsworth's gaze soon fell upon her. "Who is this?" she demanded. "I haven't seen her before." "This is Miss Montgomery, my new assistant," Mrs. Hollister explained. "She's been helping with the Peterson wedding party garments." Mrs. Farnsworth surveyed Hazel with obvious disapproval. "I hope she hasn't been working on Helena's dress. I prefer your personal attention for my daughter." Something about the woman's condescending tone struck a nerve in Hazel. Before Mrs. Hollister could respond, Hazel stood and approached the dress form that held Helena's half-completed gown. "Actually, Mrs. Farnsworth, I've been working primarily on this dress," Hazel said calmly. "If you're concerned about the quality, perhaps you'd like to examine my stitching." Mrs. Farnsworth's eyes widened at being directly challenged. "Well, I never—" "Mother, please," Helena interjected quietly. "The dress looks beautiful." Hazel turned to the girl with a softer expression. "Thank you. I think it will suit you perfectly. The color complements your complexion." Mrs. Farnsworth wasn't so easily placated. "Be that as it may, we still require French lace." "I'm afraid that's impossible on such short notice," Mrs. Hollister said firmly. "The wedding is just 2 weeks away."
Impossible?
Mrs. Farnsworth echoed incredulously. "I won't accept that. My husband is the bank manager, and we expect—" The bell above the door jingled again, and Wyatt Caldwell stepped into the tense scene. "Afternoon, ladies," he greeted, removing his hat. "Mrs. Hollister, I've come to see if Miss Montgomery might be available to help with a small matter." Mrs. Farnsworth's demeanor changed instantly at Wyatt's arrival. "Mr. Caldwell, how fortunate. Perhaps you can assist us." I'm trying to explain to Mrs. Hollister the importance of proper materials for the Peterson wedding. Wyatt glanced between the women, quickly assessing the situation. I'm sure Mrs. Hollister is providing the finest materials available, Mrs. Farnsworth. But she claims French lace is impossible to obtain in time.
Ah, Wyatt nodded tactfully.
That is unfortunate. Although, I did hear Miss Peterson specifically requested that no one else in the wedding party outshine her on her special day. Very particular about being the center of attention, from what I understand. Mrs. Farnsworth's expression faltered. Did she say that? Not to me directly, Wyatt replied with perfect innocence. But it was mentioned at the bank when her father was discussing the wedding expenses with your husband. Something about anyone attempting to outdo the bride would not be looked upon favorably by the Peterson family. Helena tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mother, I'm perfectly happy with the dress as it is. Mrs. Farnsworth hesitated, clearly torn between her desire for her daughter to stand out and the social consequences of offending the influential Peterson family. Well, she finally said, perhaps we should respect the bride's wishes. The dress is adequate as designed. After the Farnsworths departed, Mrs. Hollister turned to Wyatt with a knowing smile. Mr. Caldwell, I strongly suspect you just fabricated that entire story about the Petersons. Wyatt's eyes twinkled with mischief. Mrs. Hollister, I'm shocked at the accusation. I merely repeated what I believed I heard. Mrs. Hollister hummed skeptically. And what urgent matter requires Miss Montgomery's assistance? Yes. Wyatt turned to Hazel. I was hoping you might help me select a gift for my sister's birthday. I'm afraid I have little knowledge of what would please a lady of refined taste. Hazel looked at him suspiciously. You have a sister? I do indeed. Hannah lives in Austin with her husband. Her birthday is next month, and I'd like to send something nice. Mrs. Hollister chuckled. Miss Montgomery, you may as well help the poor man. He'll only come up with increasingly creative excuses if you refuse. Hazel sighed but reached for her shawl. Very well, Mr. Caldwell. Where are we going to find this gift? The general store has received some new items from back east, he replied. I thought we might start there. As they walked down the street together, Hazel glanced sideways at Wyatt. There was no need to invent a story about the Petersons. Wasn't there, he countered. Mrs. Farnsworth is known for making life difficult for anyone she considers beneath her station. Mrs. Hollister doesn't deserve that treatment. Still, lying isn't. Sometimes a small deception prevents a greater unkindness, he interrupted gently. The Farnsworth girl was mortified by her mother's behavior. I simply provided a graceful way for Mrs. Farnsworth to retreat without losing face. Hazel couldn't argue with his reasoning, though she was reluctant to admit it. And, do you really have a sister named Hannah? A slow smile spread across Wyatt's face.
Ida.
Though her birthday was last month, not next. Despite herself, Hazel felt the corners of her mouth twitch. So you lied again. I prefer to think of it as creating an opportunity, he replied cheerfully. And look at that, almost a smile. I'm making progress. Hazel quickly composed her features. You imagined it, Mr. Caldwell. Perhaps, he conceded. But imagination is a powerful thing. At the general store, Wyatt greeted the proprietor warmly. Afternoon, Howard. Just showing Miss Montgomery some of your new merchandise. Howard Jenkins, a balding man with spectacles, nodded approvingly. You've come at the right time. Just unpacked a shipment yesterday. Got some nice ladies' items over on that shelf. While Wyatt examined a display of leather gloves, Hazel found herself drawn to a shelf containing books. It had been months since she'd had the luxury of reading for pleasure. You enjoy reading? Wyatt asked, noticing her interest. I used to, she replied softly. Before. She trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Wyatt didn't press. Instead, he picked up a volume. This one's supposed to be quite good. Mr. Twain has a unique way with words. Hazel took the book, running her fingers over the cover of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Perhaps you'd like to borrow it, Wyatt suggested. I purchased it last month, but haven't had time to read it yet. Before she could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the store window, they could see a wagon had overturned in the middle of the street, spilling crates and barrels across the dusty road. That's Old Man Simmons, Howard said, moving toward the door. His wheel's been wobbling for weeks. Told him to get it fixed. Wyatt was already heading outside, with Hazel following close behind. The scene was chaotic, a horse whinnying nervously, an elderly man attempting to right his wagon, and townspeople gathering to watch. "Mr. Simmons, are you hurt?" Wyatt called out, approaching the man. "Just my pride, Wyatt," Simmons replied, his weathered face flushed with embarrassment. "And my apples." Was bringing them to sell at the general store. Indeed, apples were scattered everywhere, rolling down the slight incline of the street. Several children had already begun chasing after them, turning the mishap into an impromptu game. "Tommy Miller, you bring those apples back here," Simmons called out to a young boy who was stuffing his pockets. "Those are my livelihood." The boy looked sheepish but continued collecting apples. "I'll pay for what the children take," Wyatt assured Simmons. "Let's get your wagon upright first." Several men from the gathering crowd stepped forward to help. With coordinated effort, they managed to lift the wagon back onto its wheels. The broken one would need replacing, but at least the vehicle was upright again. As the men worked on the wagon, Hazel found herself automatically gathering apples, placing them carefully back into the intact crates. A young girl of about 7 approached her with an armful of the fruit. "Are these Mr. Simmons' apples?" the child asked solemnly. "Yes, they are," Hazel replied. "Thank you for collecting them." The girl deposited her load into Hazel's crate, then looked up with wide eyes. "You're pretty. Are you going to marry Mr. Wyatt?" The question was so unexpected that Hazel nearly dropped the crate.
No.
"I hardly know Mr. Caldwell. My mama says he needs a wife," the girl continued, undeterred by Hazel's denial. "She says he's the finest catch in the territory, but too picky for his own good." "Your mama shouldn't gossip about Mr. Caldwell," Hazel said, feeling strangely defensive on his behalf. "It's not gossip if it's true," the girl replied with the impeccable logic of a child. "And Mama says, Sarah Jane Miller, are you bothering this lady?" A woman approached, looking apologetically at Hazel. "No, Mrs. Miller, she's not bothering me," Hazel assured her. "She's been helping collect Mr. Simmons' apples." Mrs. Miller nodded approvingly at her daughter. "That's good, Sarah Jane. Now run along and find your brother. It's nearly time for supper." As the girls skipped away, Mrs. Miller turned to Hazel with a friendly smile. "You must be Miss Montgomery. I've heard you're working with Eleanor Hollister." "News travels fast in Copper Creek," Hazel observed. "It's a small town," Mrs. Miller agreed. "But a good one. Will you be staying long?" "I haven't decided," Hazel replied, the answer becoming increasingly true with each passing day. What had begun as a temporary stop was beginning to feel less temporary. By the time all the salvageable apples were collected and the wagon secured enough to move to the livery for proper repairs, the sun was beginning to set. Wyatt approached Hazel, his shirt sleeves rolled up and a smudge of dirt on his cheek. "Thank you for helping," he said. Not many newcomers would pitch in like that. "It seemed the right thing to do," she replied simply. "Would you allow me to buy you dinner as a token of appreciation? The cafe serves a fine stew on Fridays." Hazel hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the distance she had so carefully established. But another part she'd thought long dead yearned for the simple pleasure of a meal shared with someone who seemed genuinely interested in her company. "Just dinner," she agreed, echoing her condition from their breakfast days earlier. "Just dinner," he confirmed with a smile that suggested he considered it a significant victory. The cafe was busier than it had been at breakfast, filled with townspeople ending their workday with a hot meal. Wyatt led Hazel to a corner table, pulling out her chair with a gentlemanly flourish that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "You flour on your face," she pointed out as they sat down. Wyatt rubbed at his cheek, missing the spot entirely. Without thinking, Hazel reached across the table and brushed the smudge away with her fingertips. The moment her skin touched his, she felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. She withdrew her hand quickly, embarrassed by the familiarity of the gesture. If Wyatt noticed her discomfort, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he ordered them both the stew and fresh bread, along with coffee. "You handled Mrs. Farnsworth skillfully earlier," he remarked as they waited for their food. "Most people find her intimidating. I've encountered worse than Mrs. Farnsworth," Hazel replied, then wished she hadn't when she saw the curiosity in Wyatt's eyes. "You've never mentioned where you came from," he said carefully. "Or what brought you to Copper Creek?" Hazel stirred her coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl. "No, I haven't. I'm not asking you to share what you're not ready to," Wyatt assured her. "Just know that when you are ready, I'm willing to listen." His sincerity was disarming. For a brief moment, Hazel considered telling him everything about the fire that had claimed her parents' lives, about the marriage she'd entered out of desperation, about the husband whose cruelty had nearly broken her before his death had set her free. But the words remained locked inside her, too painful to release.
"Thank you," she said instead.
But some stories are better left untold. Their food arrived, steaming and fragrant. The stew was indeed excellent, rich with beef and vegetables. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the bustle of the cafe around them providing a buffer against the need for conversation. "Will you attend the social tomorrow?" Wyatt asked eventually. "I hadn't planned to," Hazel replied. "Mrs. Hollister will be there," he pointed out. "Most of the town attends. There's good food, music. Nothing too fancy." "I don't dance, Mr. Caldwell." "Neither do I," he admitted with a grin. "Have 2 left feet, according to my sister. But the company is pleasant, and it might help you feel more a part of the community while you're here." "Even temporarily?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Even temporarily," he confirmed. "Though I'm beginning to hope your stay might be less temporary than you initially planned." The honesty of his statement caught her off guard. Before she could formulate a response, a shadow fell across their table. "Well, if it isn't the high and mighty Wyatt Caldwell," a slurred voice announced. Hazel looked up to see Barton, the cowboy from the altercation earlier in the week. His eyes were bloodshot, and he swayed slightly on his feet. "Evening, Barton," Wyatt replied evenly. "You're interrupting our dinner." "Don't much care," Barton sneered. "You made me look a fool in front of my boys. Made the sheriff fine me for disturbing the peace." "You did that yourself," Wyatt pointed out. "Now, I suggest you go sleep off whatever you've been drinking." Barton's gaze shifted to Hazel, his expression turning unpleasantly appraising. "This your woman, Caldwell? Pretty little thing. Too good for the likes of you." Wyatt's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Apologize to the lady, Barton." "Or what?" Barton challenged, leaning on their table. "Or I'll escort you out of here myself," Wyatt replied. "And it won't be gentle." The cafe had gone quiet, all eyes on the confrontation. Hazel felt her heart racing, the familiar sensation of fear creeping up her spine. She'd seen that look in a man's eyes before, the volatile combination of alcohol and wounded pride. "Mr. Barton," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, "I believe the kitchen was about to close. If you want dinner, you should order now." Her unexpected intervention seemed to confuse Barton momentarily. He blinked at her, then straightened. "Don't need dinner," he muttered. "Just wanted Caldwell here to know I ain't forgot what he did." "Message received," Wyatt said firmly. "Now go home." For a tense moment, it seemed Barton might escalate the situation. Then, with a final glare, he turned and staggered toward the door. As conversation resumed around them, Wyatt looked at Hazel with newfound respect. That was quick thinking. He didn't want to fight, she observed. He wanted attention and audience. I simply provided a way for him to leave without losing face. A slow smile spread across Wyatt's face. Using my own tactics against me, Miss Montgomery? Learning from observation, Mr. Caldwell, she corrected, though she couldn't quite suppress the upward quirk of her lips. Was that almost a smile I detected? He asked, his eyes brightening. A facial spasm, she replied dryly. Nothing more. Wyatt laughed, the sound warm and genuine. One day, Miss Montgomery, I'll earn a real smile from you. And when I do, I suspect it will be worth every effort. As he walked her back to the boarding house after dinner, Hazel found herself more confused than ever. The wall she had built around her heart, her protection against further pain, seemed to be developing cracks. Wyatt Caldwell's persistent kindness was an assault her defenses hadn't been designed to withstand. "Thank you for dinner," she said as they reached the boarding house steps. "My pleasure," he replied. "Will I see you at the social tomorrow?" Hazel hesitated, then made a decision that surprised even herself. Perhaps. For a short while. The smile that lit up his face was almost worth the anxiety her acceptance caused her. "I'll look for you then. Good night, Miss Montgomery." "Good night, Mr. Caldwell." As she prepared for bed that night, Hazel caught her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. The face that looked back at her was one she barely recognized anymore, thin, pale, with shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and haunting memories. "I can't smile anymore," she whispered to her reflection, repeating the words she'd spoken to Wyatt on their first meeting. Yet as she crawled beneath the quilt, she wondered if perhaps that wasn't entirely true anymore. Saturday dawned clear and bright. Hazel worked a half day at the dress shop, helping Mrs. Hollister finish a rush order for a customer who needed a dress for the social that evening. "Will you be attending tonight, Hazel?" Mrs. Hollister asked as they put away their supplies. "I'm considering it," Hazel replied, still not fully committed despite what she'd told Wyatt. "I hope you will," the older woman said kindly. "It would be good to meet more people in town. And," she added with a knowing glance, "I believe Mr. Caldwell would be disappointed if you didn't appear." "Mr. Caldwell seems to have a great many opinions about what I should and shouldn't do," Hazel observed. Mrs. Hollister chuckled. "He can be persistent when he sets his mind to something, but his heart is in the right place." As Hazel walked back to the boarding house, she considered her options. She could remain in her room, reading the book Wyatt had loaned her. It would be the safer choice, maintaining the emotional distance she had so carefully established. Or she could attend the social just for a little while and perhaps begin to acknowledge that Copper Creek was becoming more than just a temporary stop on her journey. In her room, she opened her dresser drawer and withdrew her best dress, a dark blue cotton with a lace collar, simple but appropriate for a small-town gathering. She had brought it with her when she fled her husband's home, one of the few possessions she had claimed as her own. As she dressed, she found herself wondering what Wyatt would think of her in something other than her working clothes. The thought made her cheeks warm, and she chastised herself for caring about his opinion. The church where the social was being held was at the far end of the main street, a white clapboard building with a small steeple. As Hazel approached, she could hear music and laughter spilling from the open doors. Lanterns had been strung across the churchyard, creating pools of golden light in the gathering dusk. For a moment, she hesitated at the edge of the light, the familiar urge to retreat nearly overwhelming her. Then she thought of Wyatt's persistent kindness, of Mrs. Hollister's gentle encouragement, and of the life she had been living, not really living, just existing since her escape from her past. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the light. The church's interior had been transformed for the occasion. Pews had been pushed against the walls to create an open space for dancing. Tables laden with food lined one side of the room, and a small group of musicians played lively tunes on fiddles, and a banjo in the corner. Hazel had barely stepped inside when Mrs. Hollister spotted her and waved her over. "You came," the dressmaker exclaimed. "And don't you look lovely? That shade of blue suits you perfectly." "Thank you," Hazel replied, feeling self-conscious among so many unfamiliar faces. "I won't stay long." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hollister said firmly. "You must at least try some of the food. Mrs. Jenkins makes a peach cobbler that's worth coming to these socials for alone." As Mrs. Hollister led her toward the food tables, Hazel scanned the room automatically for Wyatt. She didn't see him among the crowds of townspeople and told herself the pang of disappointment she felt was merely surprise. She had just accepted a plate of food from Mrs. Hollister when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You came." Turning, she found Wyatt standing there, looking more polished than she'd ever seen him. His usual work clothes had been replaced by a clean white shirt, dark vest, and pants that appeared freshly pressed. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly shaved for the occasion. "I said I might," she replied, trying to sound casual despite the sudden flutter in her chest. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The direct compliment made her uncomfortable. "Thank you. You look different." He laughed. "I clean up reasonably well when the occasion demands it. Though I'll admit these clothes feel strange after days in the saddle." Mrs. Hollister, observing their exchange with obvious approval, excused herself to greet other arrivals, leaving Hazel alone with Wyatt. "Have you tried the food yet?" he asked, gesturing to her untouched plate. "Not yet," she admitted. "I was just about to." "The berry pie is especially good," he recommended. "Mrs. Miller bakes it with berries from her own garden." They found a relatively quiet corner where they could eat and observe the festivities. Children darted between groups of adults, playing improvised games. Young couples danced to the lively music, while older community members sat in chairs along the walls, tapping their feet in time with the melodies. "It's nice," Hazel said after a while, "seeing people happy." Wyatt glanced at her, something soft in his expression. "Yes, it is. Simple pleasures, but important ones." They watched as a young couple whirled past, the girl laughing as her partner spun her in an enthusiastic, if not entirely graceful circle. "Are you sure you don't dance?" Wyatt asked. "Not even a slow one?" Hazel shook her head firmly. "Quite sure." "Fair enough," he accepted easily. "Though I should warn you, Mrs. Peterson has appointed herself matchmaker for the unmarried members of this community. She'll likely try to push you onto the dance floor with any eligible bachelors she can find." As if his words had conjured her, an older woman in an elaborate purple dress approached them, her expression determined. "Mr. Caldwell," she greeted Wyatt before turning her attention to Hazel. "And you must be Miss Montgomery. I've heard so much about you." "Mrs. Peterson," Wyatt replied with a respectful nod. "Yes, this is Miss Hazel Montgomery, recently arrived from back east." "Chicago," Hazel supplied, not wanting Wyatt to inadvertently contradict something she'd told someone else. "How lovely, Mrs. Peterson said, though her expression suggested she found nothing particularly lovely about Chicago. "You know, my nephew Thomas is visiting from Denver. He's a banker, very respectable. I'm sure he'd be delighted to dance with a new face in town." Before Hazel could formulate a polite refusal, Wyatt intervened. "I'm afraid I've already claimed Miss Montgomery's company for the evening, Mrs. Peterson. Perhaps another time." The woman looked between them, clearly reassessing the situation. "I see," she said, a hint of disappointment in her tone. "Well, do enjoy the festivities." As she moved away to target another potential victim, Hazel gave Wyatt a questioning look. "You've claimed my company?" "A necessary falsehood," he replied with a grin. "Unless you were eager to dance with banker Thomas from Denver?" Despite herself, Hazel felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "I suppose I should thank you for the rescue." You're welcome, he said, then added more seriously, though I meant what I said about enjoying your company. The sincerity in his voice made her uncomfortable again, and she looked away, focusing on the dancers. Tell me about your ranch, she said, deliberately changing the subject. How long have you had it? If Wyatt was disappointed by her deflection, he didn't show it.
About 4 years now.
It's not large, just 80 acres with a small herd of cattle and some horses. But it's mine, free and clear. And the livery stable? That came first. Bought it from old Tim Fletcher when his arthritis got too bad for him to manage. The ranch came later, when I'd saved enough. You've built a good life here, Hazel observed. I'm trying to, he agreed, though there are aspects still missing. She knew what he meant but wasn't ready to acknowledge it. Instead, she asked, how did you come to settle in Copper Creek? You mentioned you were with the Rangers before. Wyatt's expression grew more serious. I rode with them for 5 years after the war. Saw things I wish I hadn't. Did things I'm not always proud of, though they were necessary at the time. What made you leave? He was quiet for a moment, considering her question. There was a raid on a homestead near the border. Bad business. A family with young children. By the time we arrived, it was too late for most of them. But there was a little girl, couldn't have been more than 6, hiding in a root cellar. She'd seen everything. Hazel felt a chill despite the warmth of the crowded room. I stayed with her until we could find her aunt and uncle in the next county, Wyatt continued. 3 days, just me and this child who wouldn't speak, wouldn't cry, just stared with eyes that had seen too much. He paused, lost in the memory. When we found her relatives, she finally broke down, clung to me, begging me not to leave her. And I realized I couldn't keep living that life, riding from one tragedy to another, always too late to prevent the worst from happening. So you came here, Hazel said softly. Not immediately, he replied. Finished my time with the Rangers, then drifted for a while. Found Copper Creek. By accident my horse threw a shoe, and this was the nearest town. Something about the place felt right. People were decent, hard-working. Land was available for those willing to work it. So I stayed. His story touched something in Hazel, a recognition of shared experience, though their pasts were vastly different. They had both seen darkness, both sought something better. Thank you for telling me, she said quietly. Your turn, he replied, his gaze gentle but direct. Something brought you here, Hazel. Something you're running from. The use of her given name, the first time he had used it, struck her deeply. For a moment, she almost told him everything about the fire that had left her orphaned at 19, about her marriage to a man 20 years her senior who had seemed kind until the wedding vows were spoken, about the 2 years of escalating cruelty that had ended only when he had fallen from his horse, drunk, and broken his neck. But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Yes, she admitted simply. But I'm not ready to speak of it. He nodded, accepting her boundary. When you are, I'll listen. The music changed then, shifting to a slower, sweeter melody. Wyatt stood and extended his hand to her. I know you said you don't dance, he said. But this one's easy. Just a slow walk, really. Would you consider it? Hazel looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face open, hopeful, patient. Something inside her, some last resistance, began to crumble. Just one, she agreed, placing her hand in his. He led her to the edge of the dance floor, away from the more enthusiastic couples. His hand rested lightly at her waist, respectful of her space, while still guiding her through the simple steps. See? Not so terrible, he murmured as they moved to the gentle rhythm. I never said it would be terrible, she replied. Merely that I don't dance. And yet here you are, dancing quite gracefully. They moved together with surprising ease, as if they had done this many times before. Hazel was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, of his other hand holding hers, of the subtle scent of soap and leather that seemed to be uniquely his. "May I ask you something?" he said after a few moments. "You may ask," she replied cautiously. "I may not answer." His lips quirked in a half-smile. "Fair enough. When you say you can't smile anymore, is it that you can't or that you won't?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know," she admitted. "Perhaps both. Because I've seen moments," he continued gently, "just flashes, when something almost like a smile appears. Like you're remembering how." Hazel looked away, uncomfortable with his perception. "There hasn't been much cause for smiling in my life recently." "Yet you keep going," he observed. "That takes courage." "Or stubbornness," she countered. "Often the same quality, viewed differently," he replied with a smile. As the music drew to a close, Hazel expected him to release her, but he hesitated, still holding her hand. "Thank you for the dance," he said softly. "You're welcome," she replied, suddenly conscious of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his hand around hers. A commotion at the church entrance broke the moment. Sheriff Taylor had appeared, his expression grim as he scanned the room. "Wyatt," he called out, spotting them. "Need a word." Wyatt reluctantly released Hazel's hand. "Excuse me," he said. "I'll be right back." She watched as he crossed to the sheriff, the two men speaking in low, urgent tones. Whatever news the sheriff brought, it wasn't good. Wyatt's expression darkened as he listened. When he returned to her side, his earlier relaxed demeanor had vanished. "I'm sorry," he said. "There's trouble at the Simmons place. Fire in the barn. Sheriff's gathering men to help." "Of course," Hazel replied, understanding immediately. "You should go." He hesitated, clearly torn between duty and his desire to remain with her. "Will you be all right getting back to the boarding house?" "Perfectly all right," she assured him.
Go.
"People need your help." With a grateful nod, he turned to join the group of men already heading for the door. Hazel watched him go, a strange mix of emotions churning within her: disappointment at the interruption of their evening, concern for the Simmons family, and an unexpected surge of admiration for Wyatt's immediate readiness to help others. Mrs. Hollister appeared at her side. "Trouble at the Simmons farm," she said. "Such a shame they've had more than their share of hardship this year." "Is it serious?"
Hazel asked.
"A barn fire can be devastating," Mrs. Hollister replied grimly. "If it spreads to the house, they could lose everything." Hazel thought of her own experience with fire, of the helplessness of watching flames consume everything familiar. "Is there anything we can do?" Mrs. Hollister considered for a moment. "The women usually prepare food and bandages. There's always need after a fire burns to treat hungry men who've been fighting the flames." "I'd like to help," Hazel said, surprising herself with the offer. "Good." Mrs. Hollister nodded approvingly. "Let's gather what we can from here and head to my house. It's closest to the road out to the Simmons place." For the next hour, Hazel worked alongside several women from the town, packing baskets with food from the social, boiling water for coffee, and tearing clean sheets into strips for bandages. The festive atmosphere of earlier had been replaced by purposeful activity, the community rallying to support one of their own. It was past midnight when the first men returned, exhausted and smoke-stained. Mrs. Jenkins, who had taken charge of the operation, directed them to chairs where they could rest while being served coffee and food. "Did you save the barn?" Mrs. Hollister asked one of the first to return. The man shook his head wearily. "Too far gone by the time we got there. But we kept it from spreading to the house and the other outbuildings." "Thank the Lord for that," Mrs. Hollister murmured. "Any injuries?" "Minor burns, mostly. Simmons' oldest boy got it worst, tried to save their mule before anyone arrived. Wyatt's bringing him in now." Hazel's heart quickened at the mention of Wyatt's name. She busied herself preparing a fresh pot of coffee, trying not to appear too concerned. More men arrived, among them Sheriff Taylor, who accepted a cup of coffee with a grateful nod. "Nasty business," He commented to no one in particular, though could have been worse. Wyatt organized a bucket line from the creek, kept the flames from jumping to the house. Any idea how it started? Mrs. Jenkins asked. The sheriff's expression hardened. Wasn't natural, that's for certain. Simmons says he smelled coal oil before the flames broke out. A murmur went through the gathered women. Deliberately set? Mrs. Hollister asked, her voice low with shock. Appears so, the sheriff confirmed grimly. Question is, who'd want to harm the Simmons family? They're good people, keep to themselves mostly. Before anyone could speculate further, the door opened to admit Wyatt and another man supporting a youth of perhaps 17 between them. The boy's right arm and side of his face were angry red with burns, his expression tight with pain. Over here, Mrs. Jenkins directed, indicating a pallet they had prepared by the stove. I've sent for the doctor. As they lowered the injured boy onto the makeshift bed, Wyatt looked up and spotted Hazel. Surprise registered on his soot-blackened face before he approached her. You're still up, he said, his voice rough from smoke. You didn't have to stay. I wanted to help, she replied simply. She handed him a cup of coffee, which he accepted gratefully. You look exhausted. Been better, he admitted, taking a deep drink of the hot liquid. Been worse, too. Up close, she could see that his shirt was singed in places, and an angry red mark on his forearm suggested he hadn't entirely escaped the flames himself. You're burned, she observed, gesturing to his arm. He glanced down as if noticing it for the first time. It's nothing. Young Simmons got the worst of it. Still, it should be cleaned, she insisted, already reaching for the basin of cool water and the bandages they had prepared. Too tired to argue, Wyatt sat in a chair and allowed her to tend to his injury. As she gently cleaned the burn, she was acutely aware of his gaze on her face. Thank you, he said quietly. For staying. For helping. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. There was something intimate about caring for his wound, about the trust implicit in his allowing her to do so. Sheriff thinks it was deliberately set, she said after a moment, keeping her voice low. Wyatt's expression darkened. I know. Found a broken lantern by the barn door, reeking of coal oil. Someone wanted that barn to burn. But why? Mrs. Hollister said the Simmons family keeps to themselves. They do, he confirmed, which makes this all the more concerning. As she finished bandaging his arm, the doctor finally arrived, heading straight for young Simmons. The boy's father had arrived as well, looking shell-shocked as he watched the physician examine his son. Will he be all right? Hazel asked Wyatt, nodding toward the boy. Doc Barnes is good at his job, Wyatt replied. The burns are painful but not life-threatening, I think. He stood, swaying slightly with fatigue. I should speak with the sheriff again before he leaves. And then you should rest, Hazel said firmly. You've done enough for one night. A tired smile crossed his face. Yes, madam. As he moved away to join the sheriff, Hazel found herself watching him with a growing awareness that her feelings for Wyatt Caldwell had progressed far beyond mere gratitude or friendship. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was nearly dawn by the time the last of the men departed. The Simmons boy had been moved to the doctor's house for further treatment, his prognosis good despite the painful burns. Mrs. Hollister insisted that Hazel return to the boarding house to rest. You've been a tremendous help, the older woman told her warmly. But you're dead on your feet, child. Hazel couldn't argue with that assessment. Exhaustion had settled deep in her bones, making even the short walk back to the boarding house seem daunting. As she gathered her shawl, Wyatt appeared at her side. May I walk you back? He asked, his own fatigue evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. You should be heading home yourself, she pointed out. You look ready to collapse. Probably, he agreed with a weary smile. But I'd rest easier knowing you got back safely. Too tired to argue, Hazel nodded her acceptance. They walked in companionable silence through the streets of Copper Creek, the first light of dawn painting the eastern sky with pale gold and pink. "You were wonderful tonight," Wyatt said as they neared the boarding house, stepping in to help without hesitation. "It was the least I could do," she replied. "Everyone has been kind to me since I arrived." He stopped at the bottom of the boarding house steps, turning to face her. "Hazel," he said, her name soft on his lips. "I know you came to Copper Creek intending to pass through. But I hope you know that you've found a place here if you want it." The sincerity in his voice, the openness of his expression, touched something deep within her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Hazel felt a genuine smile forming small, tentative, but real. "There it is," Wyatt said softly, his eyes lighting up. A smile. A real one. Self-conscious, Hazel touched her lips, as if to verify his observation. "I suppose it is. And every bit as beautiful as I imagined," he added, his gaze warm. The moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility. Hazel knew that if she stepped away now, retreated behind her carefully constructed walls, Wyatt would accept it. He would continue his patient pursuit, never pushing her beyond what she was ready to give. But in that moment, exhausted and emotionally raw from the night's events, Hazel found herself unwilling to retreat any further. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." "I haven't done anything worth thanking," he replied, "except perhaps being stubborn enough not to give up on making you smile." "That's worth quite a lot," she told him softly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. "Get some rest, Hazel. I'll see you tomorrow." As she watched him walk away, his steps heavy with fatigue, Hazel realized with startling clarity that Copper Creek was no longer merely a stop on her journey. Somehow, without her noticing, it had begun to feel like a destination. The next week passed in a blur of activity. The fire at the Simmons farm had galvanized the community, with volunteers helping to clear the burned remains of the barn and begin construction on a new one. Though Sheriff Taylor continued his investigation into the arson, no clear suspect had emerged. Hazel threw herself into her work at the dress shop, grateful for the distraction from her confused feelings. She saw Wyatt only briefly during this time. He was heavily involved in the rebuilding efforts at the Simmons place, often returning to town long after she had retired for the evening. Yet each day brought some small token from him, a wildflower left on the step of the dress shop, a note inquiring after her well-being, once even a small wooden carving of a bird that he must have whittled himself during rare moments of rest. On Friday afternoon, as Hazel was finishing work, Mrs. Hollister approached her with an unusual request. "I've had a letter from my sister in Tucson," the older woman explained. "She's fallen ill and has asked me to come help with her children. I'll need to leave tomorrow and may be gone for several weeks." "Of course," Hazel replied. "I hope she recovers quickly." "Thank you, dear. But this puts me in a difficult position with the shop. The Peterson wedding is in just over a week, and there are still several garments to complete." Understanding dawned on Hazel. "You want me to manage the shop while you're away?" Mrs. Hollister nodded, looking relieved at Hazel's quick comprehension. "Would you? You've proven yourself more than capable, and I would rest easier knowing the business was in good hands." The request took Hazel by surprise. It represented a level of trust she hadn't expected and a responsibility that suggested a more permanent arrangement than she had envisioned for herself in Copper Creek. I'm not sure I'm qualified," she hedged. "Nonsense," Mrs. Hollister said firmly. "You have excellent skills, a good eye for detail, and the customers respect you. I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe you could do it." Put that way, Hazel found it difficult to refuse. "Very well," she agreed. "I'll do my best." "Wonderful," Mrs. Hollister beamed. "I'll make arrangements for you to move into the rooms above the shop while I'm gone. It will be more convenient than staying at the boarding house." This additional arrangement gave Hazel pause. Moving into Mrs. Hollister's private quarters seemed a significant step toward permanence. Yet she couldn't deny the practicality of the suggestion, particularly with the long hours the wedding preparations would require. "If you're sure," she said cautiously. "Absolutely sure," Mrs. Hollister confirmed. "Now, let me show you where everything is kept." For the next hour, the older woman guided Hazel through the business aspects of running the shop, the ledger where orders were recorded, the cabinet where special fabrics were stored, the list of accounts with various suppliers in Denver and beyond. By the time they finished, Hazel's head was swimming with information, but she felt reasonably confident that she could manage in Mrs. Hollister's absence. "One last thing," Mrs. Hollister said as they were closing up the shop. "Wyatt Caldwell came by earlier when you were delivering Mrs. Peterson's final fitting. He asked if you might be free for dinner this evening." Hazel felt a flutter of anticipation that she couldn't quite suppress. "Did he?" "He did indeed," Mrs. Hollister replied with a knowing smile. "Said he'd call for you at the boarding house around 7, if that suits." Yes, that would be fine," Hazel found herself saying, though a part of her wondered at her own readiness to accept. Mrs. Hollister's smile widened. "He's a good man, Hazel. One of the best I know." "We're just friends," Hazel said quickly, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "Of course, Mrs. Hollister agreed, though her expression suggested she believed otherwise. "Now, you'd better go get ready if he's calling at 7. At the boarding house, Hazel found herself taking more care with her appearance than usual. She washed her face and hands, brushed out her hair, and arranged it in a style more elaborate than her usual practical knot, and put on her blue dress, the one she had worn to the social. As she fastened the last button, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror. The woman looking back at her was still thin, still bore the shadows of past trauma in her eyes, but there was something different, a hint of color in her cheeks, a sparkle of anticipation in her gaze. Precisely at 7, Mrs. Fitzgerald called up to announce that Mr. Caldwell was waiting in the parlor. Hazel took a deep breath, suddenly nervous, before descending the stairs. Wyatt stood as she entered the parlor, his hat in his hands. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance, as well as clothes were clean and pressed, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her, a smile spreading across his face. "You look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, oddly shy despite their previous interactions. "You look well rested. Has the work at the Simmons farm eased?" "We finished the frame of the new barn today," he confirmed. "The worst of it is behind us now." Mrs. Fitzgerald, hovering nearby with poorly concealed interest, finally excused herself, leaving them alone in the parlor. "Mrs. Hollister mentioned you'd be taking over the shop while she's away," Wyatt said. "That's quite a vote of confidence." "It is," Hazel agreed. "I'm not entirely sure I'm ready for such responsibility, but I couldn't refuse her when she's been so kind to me." "You'll do wonderfully," he assured her. "You have a gift with those intricate stitches and patterns." His confidence in her abilities warmed her. "Thank you. Shall we go to dinner?" To her surprise, Wyatt shook his head. "I thought we might do something different tonight, if you're amenable. It's a beautiful evening, and I've packed a picnic. There's a spot by the creek just outside town that's peaceful this time of day." The suggestion was unexpected but appealing. "A picnic sounds lovely," she said. His face lit up at her ready agreement. "Excellent. I've got my wagon outside." The wagon was indeed waiting, a small, two-seated affair with a picnic basket and blanket in the back. Wyatt helped her up to the seat with careful hands before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. As they drove through town and out toward the creek, Hazel found herself relaxing in his company. There was something comforting about Wyatt's presence, solid, dependable, without demands or expectations. "How is young Simmons recovering?" she asked as they left the last buildings of Copper Creek behind. "Better each day," Wyatt replied. "Doc Barnes says he'll have some scarring on his arm, but he's young, it won't slow him down much." "And the investigation into who set the fire?" Wyatt's expression turned somber. No clear suspects yet. Sheriff's been asking around, but no one saw anything suspicious that night. It seems so senseless, Hazel mused. Why target the Simmons family? That's what troubles me, Wyatt admitted. They're good people, work hard, mind their business. Makes me wonder if it wasn't about them specifically. What do you mean? He hesitated, as if reluctant to voice his thoughts. Could be someone wanting to send a message. Or create fear.
Or.
He trailed off. Or it could be random, Hazel finished for him. Which is almost more frightening. Exactly, he agreed. But let's not dwell on it tonight. Sheriff's doing all he can, and worrying won't change anything. They had reached a bend in the creek where a large cottonwood tree provided shade over a grassy bank. The setting sun cast golden light through the leaves, creating dappled patterns on the ground below. This is beautiful, Hazel said as Wyatt helped her down from the wagon. One of my favorite spots, he replied, retrieving the picnic basket and blanket. Peaceful, especially at this hour. He spread the blanket beneath the tree and began unpacking the basket: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of preserves. There was even a bottle of wine and 2 simple glasses. You went to a lot of trouble, Hazel observed as she sat on the blanket. No trouble, he assured her, pouring wine into the glasses. Though I will confess I had help with the food. Mrs. Jenkins at the cafe is a far better cook than I am. Hazel accepted the glass he offered her. To Mrs. Jenkins' cooking, then. And to your new position at the dress shop, he added, touching his glass gently to hers. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle gurgle of the creek and the occasional call of birds settling for the evening. As the sky began to turn the deep blue of approaching twilight, Wyatt leaned back against the trunk of the cottonwood. May I ask you something, Hazel? He said after a moment. She nodded, though a flicker of apprehension ran through her at his serious tone. When Mrs. Hollister returns, he continued, do you still plan to move on from Copper Creek? The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Hazel looked out at the creek, gathering her thoughts. I don't know, she admitted finally. When I arrived, I was certain this was just a temporary stop.
Now.
He prompted gently when she faltered. Now I'm less certain, she finished. I've found unexpected connections here. Wyatt's eyes held hers, warm with understanding. I'm glad to hear that. Copper Creek would be poorer without you. The simple sincerity of his statement touched her deeply. For a moment, she considered telling him everything about her past, about the reasons she had fled, about the fears that still haunted her. But the peaceful evening seemed too perfect to disturb with such darkness.
Thank you, she said instead.
For everything you've done to make me feel welcome here. I've been entirely selfish, he replied with a small smile. From the moment I met you, I wanted you to stay. The admission, delivered so matter-of-factly, made her heart beat faster. Why? She asked, needing to understand. He considered her question seriously. At first, it was simple curiosity. A woman traveling alone, declaring she couldn't smile any more. You were a mystery I wanted to solve. And now, she prompted when he paused. Now I know that the mystery of Hazel Montgomery goes much deeper than I initially thought, he replied. And I find myself wanting to understand all of it, no matter how long it takes. The implication of time, of patience, of a future together both thrilled and frightened her. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, she said softly. Some stories are too dark to share. I disagree, he replied, his voice equally soft. Darkness hidden festers and grows. Brought into the light, examined, understood, it begins to lose its power. His words resonated with something deep within her. How long had she been carrying her darkness alone, letting it define her, shape her every decision? I was married, she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could reconsider. In Chicago. Wyatt's expression remained open, free of judgment. "I suspected something of the sort," he said gently. "The way you sometimes flinch when a man moves too quickly near you. The wariness in your eyes." His perception startled her. Had she been so transparent? "He was cruel," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not at first. At first he was kind, charming even. My parents had died in a fire, and I was alone, vulnerable. He offered security, protection. I was 19 and frightened of the world." Wyatt remained silent, giving her the space to tell her story at her own pace. "After the wedding, he changed," she went on. "Or perhaps he simply revealed his true nature. The first time he struck me was over a dinner I had prepared that he claimed was too cold. I thought it was an aberration, that he would apologize, that things would improve." She stared at her hands, remembering. They didn't improve. They got worse. "For 2 years, I lived in fear, never knowing what might trigger his rage. I became adept at hiding bruises, at making excuses to the few friends I had left." "How did you escape?" Wyatt asked quietly. "I didn't," Hazel replied, a bitter smile touching her lips. "Fate intervened. He fell from his horse while riding drunk, broke his neck. Died instantly, according to the doctor." "And you felt—" "Relief," she admitted, the word almost a confession. "Overwhelming relief. And then guilt for feeling relieved. And then fear because I had no idea how to live on my own, how to be free after so long in a cage." She looked up at Wyatt, half expecting to see disgust or pity in his eyes. Instead, she found only compassion and a simmering anger that she sensed was directed not at her, but at the man who had hurt her. "After the funeral," she continued, "I discovered he had debts I knew nothing about. The house, the furnishings, everything was sold to pay what he owed. I was left with almost nothing." "So you came west," Wyatt concluded. "I had to go somewhere he'd never been, somewhere I could start fresh," she explained. "I took what little money remained, bought a train ticket as far as it would take me, and then continued by stagecoach until I reached Copper Creek." "And declared you couldn't smile anymore," he added softly. "Yes," she whispered, "because I truly believed I couldn't. That he had taken that from me permanently, along with my trust, my sense of safety, my belief in happiness." Wyatt reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so as not to startle her, and gently took her hand in his. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I know it wasn't easy." "It wasn't," she agreed. "But you were right. Keeping it hidden only gave it more power." They sat in silence for a time, his hand warm around hers, the creek murmuring nearby. Gradually, Hazel became aware of a strange sensation in her chest, a lightness, as if a weight she had carried for so long had begun to lift. "Wyatt," she said finally, using his given name for the first time. "I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I can be what you might want me to be." "I don't want you to be anything other than what you are," he replied simply. "Brave, resilient, kind despite what was done to you. The rest will come in its own time, if it's meant to." His patience, his understanding, moved her deeply. Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered as she drew back. The look of surprise and pleasure on his face brought a genuine smile to her lips, wider than the tentative one he had coaxed from her after the night of the fire. "There it is again," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "That smile." "I suppose you've kept your promise," she replied, "though it wasn't through making me laugh." "Not yet," he agreed with a twinkle in his eye. "But I haven't given up on that goal either." As twilight deepened into night, they packed up the remains of their picnic and returned to town. Wyatt escorted Hazel back to the boarding house, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said. "And for listening." "Thank you for trusting me with your story," he replied. "Sleep well, Hazel." As she watched him drive away, Hazel realized that for the first time in years, She felt truly hopeful about the future. The following weeks brought significant changes to Hazel's life. With Mrs. Hollister away, she took full responsibility for the dress shop, managing not only the sewing but also the business aspects, ordering supplies, keeping the ledger, dealing with occasionally demanding customers. To her surprise, she found she enjoyed the challenge. There was satisfaction in seeing the business run smoothly under her care, in knowing that Mrs. Hollister's trust in her had been well placed. She also moved into the rooms above the shop as planned, finding the space more comfortable than her room at the boarding house. The small apartment consisted of a bedroom, a sitting room with a small stove for cooking, and a washroom. The windows overlooked the main street, allowing her to observe the daily life of Copper Creek from a new perspective. Her relationship with Wyatt continued to evolve as well. He called on her regularly, sometimes taking her for drives in his wagon, other times simply walking with her through town or sitting with her on the small balcony outside her rooms in the evenings. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, never made her feel rushed or pressured. Yet Hazel could sense his feelings for her deepening, just as she was becoming increasingly aware of her own attachment to him. The Peterson wedding came and went, a grand affair by Copper Creek standards. The bride was radiant in the gown Hazel had helped create, and Mrs. Peterson made a point of complimenting her work publicly, ensuring that several other young ladies immediately placed orders for new dresses. Meanwhile, the investigation into the fire at the Simmons farm had stalled, with no new leads emerging despite the sheriff's continued efforts. The new barn was completed, thanks to the community's collective labor, and the incident began to fade from immediate concern, though it left a lingering unease in its wake. On a warm Wednesday afternoon in late summer, Hazel was working on a dress for Mrs. Miller's daughter when the shop door opened, admitting Wyatt. His expression was unusually serious. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, removing his hat as he approached the counter. "Not at all," she replied, setting aside her sewing. "Is something wrong?" "Not exactly wrong," he hedged. "But I've had news that concerns me." Sheriff Taylor received a telegram from the marshal in Silverdale. There was a fire there last night, a merchant's warehouse, destroyed completely. Hazel frowned, not immediately seeing the connection. "That's unfortunate, but Silverdale is 30 miles from here." "Yes, but the circumstances are troublingly similar to the Simmons fire," Wyatt explained. "Coal oil used as an accelerant, set after midnight when no one was likely to be around." "You think they're connected?" "I think it's possible," he replied grimly. "And if I'm right, it means whoever set the Simmons fire isn't finished." A chill ran through Hazel despite the warmth of the day. "You think they might return to Copper Creek?" "I don't know," Wyatt admitted. "But I'd feel better if you weren't staying here alone until we know more." His concern touched her, but Hazel was reluctant to give up her independence. "I appreciate your worry, Wyatt, but I can't abandon the shop. Mrs. Hollister is counting on me." "I'm not suggesting you abandon it," he clarified. "Just that you might consider staying at the boarding house again until Mrs. Hollister returns."
Or.
He hesitated, then continued, "My sister's room at my house is empty. You'd be welcome there." The offer surprised her. "Wyatt, I couldn't possibly. It would be entirely proper," he assured her quickly. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Chin, lives in a small cottage behind the main house. She's a formidable chaperone, I assure you." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Hazel found herself smiling at his description. "I don't doubt it. But I think returning to the boarding house might be the simpler solution, if you truly believe there's cause for concern." Wyatt looked relieved at her willingness to consider his advice. "I'd feel better knowing you weren't alone at night, at least until we understand what's happening with these fires." "Very well," she agreed. "I'll speak to Mrs. Fitzgerald this evening about taking my old room again." "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Now, on a more pleasant note, I came to invite you to dinner at my ranch on Sunday. Nothing formal, just a chance for you to see the place I've been telling you about." The invitation both pleased and made her nervous. Visiting Wyatt's home felt like a significant step forward in their relationship. "I'd like that," she said after a moment's consideration. "Thank you." His face brightened with genuine pleasure. "Wonderful. I'll come for you around noon if that suits." "Perfectly," she agreed. After he left, Hazel returned to her sewing, but her mind kept wandering to thoughts of Sunday's visit and what it might signify for her future. That evening, as she was closing up the shop, Sheriff Taylor appeared at the door. "Evening, Miss Montgomery," he greeted her. "Might I have a word?" "Of course, Sheriff," she replied, letting him in despite having already locked the till. "What can I help you with?" The sheriff removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. His weathered face was serious as he considered his words. "I understand Wyatt spoke to you about the fire in Silverdale," he began. "He did," she confirmed. "He seemed concerned about a possible connection to the Simmons fire." "Wyatt has good instincts," the sheriff acknowledged. "I received another telegram this afternoon. There was another fire last night in Riverdale, a livery stable. 2 horses died." Hazel felt her unease growing. That's 3 fires in 3 different towns. All within a 50-mile radius, Sheriff Taylor added grimly. All using the same method. All targeting different types of buildings. "Is there any pattern to the targets?" she asked. "None that I can discern," he admitted.
A begin, a warehouse, a livery.
Different owners, different circumstances. Which suggests the arsonist isn't targeting specific people, Hazel concluded. They're simply,
What?
enjoying the destruction? That would be my guess, the sheriff replied. And that makes them unpredictable, which is why I'm here. Wyatt mentioned his concern for your safety, staying alone above the shop. "I've already agreed to return to the boarding house," she assured him. "Good," he nodded approvingly. "And I've arranged for additional patrols at night, just as a precaution." As the sheriff turned to leave, a thought occurred to Hazel. "Sheriff, when was the fire in Riverdale?" "Exactly. Last night, just after midnight," he replied. "Why do you ask? And the one in Silverdale?" "Night before last, similar time." "So they're moving quickly," she observed. "A different town each night." The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he followed her thinking. Which means if the pattern holds, Copper Creek could be next, Hazel finished for him. Tonight. A grim determination settled over the sheriff's features. "I'll gather some men. We'll keep watch throughout the night." After he left, Hazel hurriedly packed a small bag with essentials and locked up the shop, her heart beating faster than normal as she made her way to the boarding house. The pleasant summer evening suddenly seemed ominous, shadows stretching long across the street as the sun began to set. Mrs. Fitzgerald welcomed her back warmly, expressing concern when Hazel explained the reason for her return. "Such terrible business," the older woman tooted. "Though I must say, I'm glad to have you back under my roof. Never did seem right, a young woman all alone above that shop." Hazel smiled at the landlady's motherly concern. "It's only temporary, until Mrs. Hollister returns." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Fitzgerald agreed, though her tone suggested she hoped otherwise. "Your old room is available. Supper's in half an hour." Despite the comfort of the familiar room and Mrs. Fitzgerald's excellent cooking, Hazel found sleep elusive that night. She lay awake, listening to the occasional footsteps of the sheriff's patrols passing outside, wondering if her speculation about the arsonist's pattern would prove correct. She must have dozed eventually, for she was awakened abruptly by shouts and the clanging of the town's fire bell. Rushing to the window, she saw an orange glow illuminating the night sky from the direction of the eastern edge of town. Hastily pulling on her dress and boots, Hazel hurried downstairs to find Mrs. Fitzgerald already in the parlor, her face pale with worry. "It's the mill," the landlady informed her. "Beckett's lumber mill is ablaze." Hazel felt a chill despite the warm night. She had been right, Copper Creek was indeed the arsonist's next target. "Is anyone hurt?" she asked. "Don't know yet," Mrs. Fitzgerald replied. The men are all heading that way now. Hazel's first instinct was to follow, to help as she had the night of the Simmons fire. But she hesitated, aware that rushing toward potential danger might be foolish. Her indecision was resolved by the appearance of Wyatt at the boarding house door, his face grim in the lamplight. "You're safe," he said with evident relief when he saw her. "Good. Stay here, we've got men fighting the fire, and Sheriff Taylor is organizing a search." "A search? You mean the arsonist might still be nearby?" "It's possible," Wyatt confirmed. "The fire's only just started. Whoever said it can't have gotten far." "Be careful," Hazel urged, a sudden fear gripping her at the thought of Wyatt confronting the unknown arsonist. He nodded, touching her cheek briefly. "Lock the door behind me. I'll return when I can." After he left, Hazel found herself pacing the parlor, too agitated to sit still. Mrs. Fitzgerald had gone to wake the other boarders, several of whom soon joined Hazel in the parlor, speculating anxiously about the fire and its implications for the town. "Beckett employs half a dozen men," Mr. Porter, a clerk at the bank, noted worriedly. "If the mill's destroyed, that's 6 families without income." "The whole town will feel it," agreed Miss Winters, the schoolteacher. "The mill supplies lumber for buildings all through the county." Their conversation was interrupted by another commotion outside, shouting, the sound of running feet. Hazel moved to the window just in time to see several men dragging someone down the street toward the sheriff's office. "They've caught someone," she reported to the others. "Thank the Lord," Mrs. Fitzgerald said, returning to the parlor. "Perhaps this dreadful business will end now." But Hazel's relief was short-lived. As the group passed beneath the street lamp outside the boarding house, she caught a clear glimpse of the captured man's face, Barton Delaney, the cowboy who had confronted Wyatt in the cafe. "It's Barton," she said, a sense of unease replacing her initial relief. "The man who threatened Wyatt. Barton Delaney?" Mr. Porter exclaimed. "He's a troublemaker, no doubt, but an arsonist? I wouldn't have thought it." Hazel wasn't convinced either. The Barton she had encountered seemed more the type for direct confrontation than the calculated destruction these fires represented. But she kept her doubts to herself, not wanting to undermine the town's sense of security if they had indeed caught the culprit. It was nearly dawn before Wyatt returned to the boarding house, his clothes and face blackened with soot, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "The mill's gone," he reported heavily as Hazel led him to a chair in the parlor. "Nothing left but the foundation stones and some of the brick walls." "Was anyone hurt?" she asked, bringing him a cup of coffee that Mrs. Fitzgerald had just brewed. "Thankfully, no," he replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The night watchman saw the flames starting and raised the alarm quickly. "We were able to keep the fire from spreading to the lumber yard, at least." "And Barton?" Hazel asked. "I saw them taking him to the jail." A shadow crossed Wyatt's face. "They found him near the mill, reeking of coal oil. Claims he was passing by and tried to help put out the fire, but..." He shrugged, the gesture conveying his doubt. "You don't seem convinced," Hazel observed. Wyatt sighed, running a hand through his soot-streaked hair. "Barton's a hothead with a grudge against me, certainly. But this feels different, more calculated than I'd expect from him." "Could he be working with someone else?" she suggested. "Possible," Wyatt acknowledged. "Sheriff's questioning him now. We'll see what comes of it." Despite his exhaustion, Wyatt insisted on checking the dress shop before finally heading home to rest. Hazel accompanied him, needing to see for herself that her temporary business remained untouched. The shop was as she had left it, peaceful in the early morning light. Wyatt inspected the locks on the doors and windows, finding them secure. "I think you can safely work here during the day," he told her. "But I'd still feel better if you stayed at the boarding house at night, at least until we're certain this is resolved." "I agree," Hazel said, thinking of the destruction at the mill. "Will you still want to have dinner on Sunday? With everything that's happened?" More than ever, he assured her, his eyes warming despite his fatigue. Some normality would be welcome after all this. As she watched him walk away, Hazel was struck by how naturally they had fallen into a pattern of mutual concern and support. It felt both unfamiliar and entirely right. The next few days passed in a strange mixture of tension and routine. Barton remained in jail, maintaining his innocence despite the damning circumstances of his arrest. The town began the process of clearing the destroyed mill, with talk already turning to rebuilding. No new fires were reported, either in Copper Creek or the surrounding towns, which seemed to support the theory that Barton had indeed been the arsonist. Yet Hazel couldn't shake her feeling of unease, a sense that the situation wasn't as neatly resolved as it appeared. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for her visit to Wyatt's ranch. He arrived at the boarding house precisely at noon, driving a freshly washed wagon and dressed in clean clothes that still managed to look natural on his rangy frame. "Ready for your tour?" he asked with a smile as he helped her into the wagon. "Looking forward to it," she replied honestly. After the stress of the past days, the prospect of an afternoon away from town was especially appealing. The drive to the ranch took about 20 minutes, following the creek away from town and into rolling grassland dotted with cottonwood trees. As they crested a small rise, Wyatt's property came into view, a neat white farmhouse with a broad porch, several outbuildings, corrals containing horses, and in the distance, a small herd of cattle grazing peacefully. "It's lovely," Hazel said, genuinely impressed by the orderly, prosperous appearance of the place. "It's home," Wyatt replied simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. As they approached the house, a small, elderly Chinese woman emerged onto the porch, her sharp eyes assessing Hazel with undisguised curiosity. "Mrs. Chen," Wyatt called out as he brought the wagon to a stop. "This is Miss Montgomery, the lady I told you about." The housekeeper bowed slightly, her expression inscrutable. "Welcome, Miss Montgomery. Lunch is prepared." "Thank you for having me," Hazel replied, sensing the importance of making a good impression on this formidable guardian of Wyatt's household. After helping Hazel down from the wagon, Wyatt gave her a tour of the main house, a surprisingly comfortable dwelling with simple but quality furnishings. The parlor held a piano that he admitted he couldn't play. "It came with the house, and I haven't had the heart to get rid of it," and bookshelves filled with volumes on a variety of subjects. "You read quite a lot," Hazel observed, examining the titles. "Winter evenings are long," he replied with a smile. "And there's always something new to learn." The dining room where Mrs. Chun had laid out their meal was bright with sunlight from large windows overlooking a small garden. The food was a delicious blend of traditional American fare and Chinese influences: fried chicken alongside dumplings filled with pork and vegetables, fresh bread with honey, and a spicy sauce that Wyatt warned her to use sparingly. "Mrs. Chen has been with you long?" Hazel asked as they ate. "About 3 years," Wyatt replied. Her husband worked for the railroad. After he died, she was left with little support. "I needed a housekeeper. She needed a position. It worked out well for both of us." "She seems protective of you," Hazel observed carefully. Wyatt chuckled. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it. She considers it her duty to ensure I don't make a fool of myself, and to remind me frequently that a man my age should be married with children by now." The casual mention of marriage sent a flutter through Hazel's stomach. "And what do you tell her?" "That some things can't be rushed," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "That what's worth having is worth waiting for." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Hazel looked away first, her cheeks warm. After lunch, Wyatt showed her the rest of the property: the barn where he kept his best horses, the corrals where several colts were being trained, the small orchard he had planted his first year on the ranch. "In another year or two, those trees will really start producing," he told her as they walked among the young apple and pear trees. "I have plans for a proper garden too," when time permits. You're building something lasting here, Hazel observed, echoing his words from their first breakfast together. Trying to, he agreed. Though a home needs more than just buildings and livestock to truly be complete. Again, the implication hung in the air between them. Hazel found herself imagining what it would be like to be a part of this place, to help it grow and flourish, to build a life here with Wyatt. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the afternoon waned, they sat on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western horizon. A comfortable silence had settled between them, the kind that needs no words to fill it. Thank you for today, Hazel said finally. For showing me your home. Thank you for coming, he replied. It means a great deal to me that you wanted to see it. She turned to look at him, finding his gaze already on her face, warm with an emotion she was beginning to recognize and accept. Wyatt, she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, but feeling the need to say something, to acknowledge the growing connection between them. Before she could continue, a rider appeared at the edge of the property, approaching at a gallop. Wyatt stood, his expression shifting from contentment to concern. That's Jim Taylor, he said, identifying the sheriff's deputy. Something's wrong. By the time the rider reached the house, both Wyatt and Hazel had descended to the yard to meet him. Wyatt, Jim called out as he reined his horse to a stop. Sheriff sent me. There's been another fire at the old Carson place just outside town. And Barton was still in his cell when it happened. Hazel felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. So, he wasn't the arsonist after all. Appears not, Jim confirmed grimly. Sheriff's released him with an apology, but now we're back to square one. Wyatt's face had hardened into determined lines. Anyone hurt at the Carson place? No, it's been abandoned since old man Carson died last winter, Jim replied. But that's not all. Sheriff found this nailed to a post near the property. He handed Wyatt a folded piece of paper. As Wyatt opened it, Hazel moved closer to read over his shoulder. The message was brief and chilling. For down, more to go. Fire cleanses all. 4 fires, Wyatt murmured. And a promise of more. Sheriff's calling a town meeting, Jim informed them. Tonight at the church. He wants everyone there, says we need to organize proper watches if we're going to catch this madman. We'll be there, Wyatt assured him. Tell Taylor I'll bring some of my men from the ranch to help with the patrols. As Jim rode back toward town, Wyatt turned to Hazel, his expression troubled. I'm sorry our day has been cut short. Don't be, she replied. This affects all of us. The ride back to town was subdued, both of them lost in thought about the implications of this latest development. The peaceful afternoon at the ranch seemed like a distant dream compared to the reality they now faced. The church was already filling with anxious townspeople when they arrived. Sheriff Taylor stood at the front, his normally composed features tight with concern. Beside him was Mayor Wilson, a portly man who owned the town's largest general store. As Wyatt and Hazel found seats, the mayor called the meeting to order. Friends, he began solemnly, I know you're all concerned about these fires. Sheriff Taylor has updates to share, and then we'll discuss how to proceed. The sheriff stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the assembled crowd. As most of you have heard, there was another fire today at the old Carson property. No one was hurt, but the house is a total loss. A murmur ran through the gathering, a mixture of relief that there were no casualties and anxiety about the continuing threat. More significantly, the sheriff continued, this fire occurred while Barton Delaney was in custody, which means he could not have been responsible. I've released him with the town's apologies. From the back of the church came Barton's voice, slurred but audible. Told you I didn't do it. The sheriff acknowledged him with a nod before continuing. The arsonist left a message this time, suggesting that this is the 4th fire he's set and promising more. Based on the pattern we've observed, he's striking at night, using coal oil as an accelerant and targeting buildings that are either unoccupied or minimally guarded. "So, what are we going to do about it?" called out Mr. Jenkins from the cafe. "We can't just wait for him to burn down the whole town." "We're organizing round-the-clock patrols," the sheriff replied. "Every street, every alley. I need volunteers to take shifts, armed volunteers, prepared to apprehend this individual if spotted." Hands shot up around the church, including Wyatt's. The sheriff nodded, acknowledging the response. "Additionally," he continued, "I've telegraphed for assistance from the federal marshal's office. Until help arrives, I ask that everyone remain vigilant. Report anything suspicious immediately." As the meeting progressed, practical arrangements were made for the watch rotations. Wyatt was assigned to lead one of the patrol groups, his experience with the Rangers making him a natural choice. By the time the meeting concluded, night had fallen. Wyatt's patrol was scheduled to begin at midnight, giving him a few hours to rest before his shift. "I'll walk you back to the boarding house," he told Hazel as they left the church. "Your patrol doesn't start for hours," she pointed out. "You should get some rest first." "I will," he assured her, "after I know you're safely settled." As they walked through the now quiet streets, Hazel was acutely aware of the tension in Wyatt's shoulders, the alertness in his gaze as he scanned their surroundings. "You're worried," she observed softly. "Yes," he admitted. "Not just about catching this arsonist, but about what happens if we don't. Fear can do strange things to a community, Hazel. Turn neighbor against neighbor. Breed suspicion where there should be trust." "You think that's already happening?" "I saw how quickly everyone was willing to believe Barton was guilty," he replied grimly. "Not because the evidence was overwhelming, but because it was convenient, a familiar troublemaker who could be easily blamed." They had reached the boarding house. On the porch, Wyatt turned to face her, his expression serious in the lamplight. "Hazel, I want you to promise me something," he said. "If there's any alarm tonight, any sign of fire, stay inside. Don't try to help, no matter how strong the urge." "Wyatt, please," he interrupted, his voice unusually intense. "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you. I need to know you're safe while I'm out there looking for this madman." The naked concern in his eyes touched her deeply. "I promise," she said softly. "I'll stay inside." Relief softened his features. "Thank you." For a moment, they stood in silence, the night air cool around them. Then, with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes, Wyatt leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well," he murmured. "I'll see you tomorrow." As she watched him walk away, Hazel knew with sudden, complete certainty that she had fallen in love with Wyatt Caldwell, his strength, his kindness, his unwavering integrity. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. Sleep proved elusive that night. Hazel lay awake, listening to the occasional footsteps of the patrols passing outside her window, wondering if Wyatt was among them yet. The events of the day swirled in her mind: the peaceful afternoon at the ranch, the shocking news of the latest fire, the fear that had gripped the town meeting. She must have dozed eventually, for she woke with a start to the sound of shouting in the street. For a heartbeat, she feared another fire had been discovered, but the voices outside didn't carry the panic she would expect. Instead, there was a note of triumph in the calls. Hurrying to the window, she peered out into the pre-dawn darkness. A group of men were gathered in the street, surrounding someone. As she watched, Sheriff Taylor emerged from the group, leading a figure with hands bound behind his back toward the jail. They had caught someone, possibly the arsonist. Unable to contain her curiosity, Hazel dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Fitzgerald was already in the parlor, wrapped in a dressing gown, peering through the front window. "They've got him," the landlady reported excitedly. "Caught him trying to set fire to the feed store." "Who is it?" Hazel asked, joining her at the window. "Can't see clearly," Mrs. Fitzgerald replied. "But they're taking him to the jail now. We'll know soon enough." Despite the early hour, Copper Creek was coming awake, lights appearing in windows as news of the capture spread. Hazel found herself torn between waiting for more information and going to find Wyatt to ensure he was safe. Her decision was made for her when the boarding house door opened to admit Wyatt himself, his expression a mixture of weariness and relief. "You're all right," she said, moving to meet him. "I'm fine," he assured her. "And we caught him in the act, with the coal oil and matches in his hands." "Who is it?" Mrs. Fitzgerald demanded eagerly. "Nathan Wells," Wyatt replied. Worked at the livery in Silverdale until recently." The name meant nothing to Hazel.
Why?
Why would he do this? "We don't know yet," Wyatt admitted. "He hasn't said a word since we caught him." "Sheriff's questioning him now." "You look exhausted," Hazel observed, noting the shadows beneath his eyes. "You should rest." "Soon," he promised. "I wanted to let you know personally that it's over. You can return to the rooms above the shop safely now." His thoughtfulness, even in his exhausted state, warmed her heart. "Thank you for coming to tell me. I'll walk you to the shop later if you'd like," he offered. "After I've had a few hours sleep." "I'd like that," she replied softly. He nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips despite his fatigue. "Then I'll see you this afternoon." As promised, Wyatt appeared at the boarding house afternoon, looking somewhat refreshed though still bearing signs of his sleepless night. Together, they walked to the dress shop, the streets of Copper Creek buzzing with the news of the arsonist's capture. "Has he confessed?" Hazel asked as they approached the shop. "Yes, finally," Wyatt replied, "though his reasons are hard to comprehend. Says he was cleansing the territory, whatever that means. Sheriff thinks he's not right in the head." "Will there be a trial?" "Eventually." The federal marshal arrived this morning. They'll take him to Denver once the paperwork's in order. As Hazel unlocked the shop door, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The fear that had hung over the town for days was dissipating, replaced by relief and a cautious return to normality. "Thank you," she said as they stood in the doorway, "for everything you've done to keep the town safe." "To keep me safe? I was just doing what needed doing," he replied, typically modest. "But you're welcome all the same." For a moment, they stood looking at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Wyatt cleared his throat. "I should let you get to work," he said. "Will you have dinner with me tonight? To celebrate the end of this ordeal." "I'd like that," Hazel replied with a genuine smile. The next few days saw Copper Creek gradually returning to its usual rhythms. Nathan Wells was transferred to Denver under the marshal's supervision, and the town began discussing plans to rebuild the mill and assist those affected by the fires. For Hazel, there was a more personal shift occurring. The fear and tension of the arson incidents had clarified her feelings for Wyatt, bringing into sharp focus what she had been slowly acknowledging for weeks, that she had found not just safety in Copper Creek, but a chance at happiness she had thought forever lost. A letter arrived from Mrs. Hollister, announcing her intention to return within the week. Her sister was recovering well, and she was eager to resume her life in Copper Creek. The news brought Hazel both relief and a new uncertainty with Mrs. Hollister's return. Her position as shop manager would end, and she would need to decide whether to stay on as an assistant or perhaps seek other arrangements. On Friday afternoon, as Hazel was completing a particularly challenging alteration to a writing habit for Mrs. Farnsworth, the shop door opened to admit Wyatt. His appearance at this hour was unusual. Typically, he visited in the morning or evening, not in the middle of the working day. "This is a surprise," she greeted him, setting aside her sewing. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her, though there was a nervous energy about him that caught her attention. "I was wondering if you might be free this evening for a ride out to the ranch. There's something I'd like to show you." His manner was oddly formal, almost hesitant, so unlike his usual easy confidence that Hazel found herself intrigued. "I can close the shop a little early," she offered. "Around 4? "Perfect," he agreed, visibly relieved. "I'll come for you then." After he left, Hazel found it difficult to concentrate on her work, her mind wandering to speculations about what Wyatt might want to show her. By the time 4 o'clock approached, she had worked herself into a state of nervous anticipation. True to his word, Wyatt arrived promptly, driving the same wagon they had used for their previous visit to the ranch. He helped her up to the seat with careful hands, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. The drive was filled with small talk updates on the rebuilding of the mill, news that Mrs. Hollister would be returning soon, comments on the pleasant weather that had blessed the region since the end of the arson scare. Yet beneath the casual conversation, Hazel sensed an undercurrent of tension, as if Wyatt was building towards something important. As they approached the ranch, instead of following the main drive to the house, Wyatt turned the wagon onto a smaller track that led toward the creek. "Where are we going?" Hazel asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "You'll see," he replied with a small smile. "It's not much further." The track ended in a small clearing near the creek, where the water widened into a peaceful pool before continuing its journey. Cottonwood trees provided shade, and wildflowers dotted the grassy ground. "It's beautiful here," Hazel said as Wyatt helped her down from the wagon. "It's my favorite spot on the property," he admitted, "especially in the evening, when the light hits the water just so." He led her to the edge of the creek, where a fallen log provided a natural bench. As they sat, Hazel noticed that his nervous energy had intensified, his hands fidgeting in a way she had never observed before. "Wyatt," she said gently, "what is it you wanted to show me?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "This," he said, gesturing to the clearing around them, "and what I hope it might become." From his pocket, he withdrew a folded piece of paper, which he carefully opened to reveal a sketch plan of a house larger than his current dwelling, with a broad porch that wrapped around the entire structure. "I've been planning to build a new main house," he explained, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "Right here, overlooking the creek. The current house would become guest quarters, or perhaps a place for Mrs. Chun. The new one would have proper rooms for a family, space to grow." Hazel's heart began to beat faster as she understood the implication of his words. "It looks lovely," she said softly. "Hazel," Wyatt began, turning to face her directly, "when you first came to Copper Creek, you told me you couldn't smile anymore. You believed that happiness was something that had been permanently taken from you." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I promise to make you laugh, and while I'm not certain I've fully succeeded at that yet, I've seen your smile return hesitant at first, then more confident, more genuine with each passing day." Tears pricked at Hazel's eyes as she recognized the truth in his words. "What I didn't tell you then," he continued, "was that your arrival awakened something in me as well. I had built a life here, a good life by most measures, but something was missing. A purpose beyond simply accumulating land and livestock. A reason to build for the future rather than just maintaining the present." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "You gave me that, Hazel. Your courage in facing your past, your willingness to begin again despite everything you'd endured, it showed me what true strength looks like." With his free hand, he reached into his pocket again and withdrew a small velvet box. Hazel's breath caught in her throat. "I love you," Wyatt said simply. "I love your resilience, your kindness, your quiet determination. I love the way you've found your place in this community despite your initial intention to merely pass through. Most of all, I love that you've trusted me enough to share your darkest memories and your brightest smiles." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a small diamond set in gold, nothing ostentatious, but clearly of quality. "Hazel Montgomery, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life together here, of filling this land with laughter and love and all the joy you deserve?" Tears were flowing freely down Hazel's cheeks now, but they were tears of happiness rather than sorrow. The wall around her heart, so carefully constructed after her first husband's cruelty, had been gradually dismantled by Wyatt's patient kindness, his unwavering respect, his genuine love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Wyatt Caldwell, I will marry you." The smile that lit up his face was radiant. With slightly trembling hands, he slid the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face gently and kissed her a tender, reverent kiss that spoke of promises kept and new beginnings. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Hazel found herself laughing a sound of pure joy that she had thought lost to her forever. "There it is," Wyatt said softly, his eyes shining. "Your laugh. Even more beautiful than I imagined." "You kept your promise," she replied, touching his face with wonder. "You made me laugh again." "The first of many promises I intend to keep," he assured her, drawing her close again. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the creek and the clearing where their future home would stand, Hazel knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a place to belong, but a love that would heal the wounds of her past and give her the strength to embrace whatever the future might hold. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a crisp autumn day when the cottonwood leaves had turned to gold and the air held the first hint of winter's approach. The ceremony was held in the church, with nearly the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Hollister, returned from Tucson and delighted by the engagement, insisted on creating Hazel's wedding dress as her gift to the couple, a creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, simple yet elegant, perfectly suited to its wearer. As Hazel stood before the mirror in the room above the dress shop on her wedding morning, she hardly recognized the woman who looked back at her. Gone was the thin, haunted figure who had arrived in Copper Creek months earlier, declaring she could no longer smile. In her place stood a woman with clear eyes, healthy color in her cheeks, and a smile that came easily and often. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Hollister said, putting the finishing touches on Hazel's hair arranged in soft curls with sprigs of baby's breath woven through. "I feel beautiful," Hazel replied with wonder. "And happy. So very happy." Mrs. Hollister smiled approvingly. "As you should be. Wyatt Caldwell is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Hazel countered softly. "To have found him, to have been given this second chance." A knock at the door heralded the arrival of Sheriff Taylor, who had offered to escort Hazel to the church in the absence of any family members to give her away. "It's time, Miss Montgomery," he called through the door. Or should I say, the soon-to-be Mrs. Caldwell. The name sent a thrill through Hazel, not of apprehension, as her first marriage had, but of joyful anticipation. This time, she was entering marriage with clear eyes and an open heart, knowing the character of the man who would be her husband. The church was filled with familiar faces, Mrs. Fitzgerald beaming proudly in the front pew, Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins from the cafe, young Simmons with his arms still bandaged from the fire but healing well, even Mrs. Farnsworth and her daughter Helena, the latter offering Hazel a genuine smile of congratulation. And at the altar, waiting for her with an expression of such love that it nearly took her breath away, stood Wyatt, clean-shaven, dressed in a new suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward him on Sheriff Taylor's arm. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, the traditional vows spoken with sincerity and conviction. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, drawing appreciative applause from the assembled townspeople. The celebration afterward, held in the town square under a canopy of Chinese lanterns, lasted well into the evening. There was music and dancing, food and drink, laughter and congratulations from what seemed like every resident of Copper Creek. "Happy?" Wyatt asked his new wife as they shared a moment of relative quiet at the edge of the festivities. "Completely," she assured him, her smile radiant in the lantern light. "More than I ever thought possible again." He drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is just the beginning, Hazel Caldwell." just the beginning of all the happiness you deserve." As if to underscore his words, the musician struck up a lively tune, and before Hazel could protest, Wyatt had swept her into the dance, both of them laughing as they joined the other couples whirling across the makeshift dance floor. In that moment, surrounded by the community that had become her own, secure in the love of the man who had patiently coaxed her back to life, Hazel knew that Wyatt was right. This was indeed just the beginning of a journey they would share together, through whatever joys and challenges lay ahead. The woman who couldn't smile anymore had not only found her smile again but her laugh, her joy, her place in the world. And as she looked up at her husband's face, alight with happiness to match her own, she silently thanked whatever fate or providence had led her to stop in Copper Creek, the place where her heart had finally found its home. 2 years later, on another autumn day much like their wedding day, Hazel stood on the porch of their new house overlooking the creek, a small bundle cradled in her arms. The house Wyatt had planned was now a reality, spacious, comfortable, filled with the furniture they had selected together and the small touches that made it unmistakably their home. From inside came the sound of Wyatt's boots on the wooden floor, followed by his appearance at the door. "There you are," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I thought you might be resting." "She just fell asleep," Hazel replied, looking down at their 2-month-old daughter, Hannah Rose Caldwell, named for Wyatt's sister and Hazel's mother. "She has the right idea," Wyatt observed, slipping an arm around his wife's waist. "It's been a long day." Indeed it had been. The harvest festival in town had kept them busy from dawn until late afternoon, Wyatt helping with the livestock displays while Hazel, despite having a newborn, had somehow managed to win second prize in the pie baking contest. "A good day, though," Hazel said, leaning into her husband's embrace. "The best," he agreed, gazing down at their sleeping daughter with undisguised adoration. As they stood together, watching the sun set over the land that was now truly their home, Hazel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young widow who had stepped off the stagecoach in Copper Creek, convinced she would never smile again, to the woman she was now, wife, mother, respected member of the community, partner in all things with the man who had patiently shown her that life could still hold joy after profound loss. "What are you thinking about?" Wyatt asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About promises kept," she replied softly. "About second chances. About how sometimes the end of one journey is just the beginning of a far better one." Wyatt's arm tightened around her waist. "I told you I'd make you laugh again," he reminded her with a gentle smile. "Though I confess, I had selfish motives all along." "Oh." Hazel raised an eyebrow, though her eyes danced with amusement. "And what were those?" "I wanted to hear that laugh every day for the rest of my life," he admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And see that smile first thing every morning." As if on cue, a genuine smile spread across Hazel's face, as natural and unforced as breathing. "Well, Mr. Caldwell," she said, "it seems you've gotten your wish." "Indeed I have, Mrs. Caldwell," he replied, his voice warm with contentment. "Indeed I have." And as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight, Hazel Caldwell held her daughter close, leaned into her husband's embrace, and gave thanks for the twist of fate that had brought her to Copper Creek, the place where a heartbroken woman who couldn't smile anymore had found not just her smile, but her laugh, her joy, and the love that had healed her heart.